Welcome everyone to another episode of Slasher Scotty. I am your host, Scotty McCoy, and boy, do I have a surprise for all of you. I have on Zoom with me right now, Lance, if I pronounce this correctly, Lance Reedinger, right? Awesome.
Perfect.
Awesome. And he is the author of the book titled 70. How you doing, Lance?
Perfect, Scotty. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. I'm so glad that you can make it and that we can make this happen. So the first question I got for you, how did you get involved with writing and what made you want to become an author?
Absolutely. I think that every author has that aha moment.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, after the first time watching Jaws, my mother was an avid reader, big paperback reader. Mm-hmm. And after watching Jaws, she stuck Peter Benchley's classic in my hands and said, take a look at this. Mm-hmm. And it just blew my mind. I think a lot of us that are literature freaks and we love books have that moment where you create the story yourself. And it's so much different than film. We too often see, oh, it's not as good as the book, not as good as the book. Well, when we read a book, we are the director, we are the producer, and a good author can set that in. So that's how my passion for literature started. And then being an 80s child, horror was subculture. I mean, we've had a boom in the last 10 years. So I, of course, navigated right to Clive Barker, Stephen King, Anne Rice. Yeah. And that's where the passion really started.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the book is titled 70. So what is this book about and why did you title it 70?
Sure. So to start, several years ago, I wanted to start putting out my own work. I kept seeing a lot of other people do it. And, mm-hmm. you take that jump off the cliff mm-hmm. and say, let me try it. What had happened in horror, as we see building up to this, is 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre comes out. They did a good job with the reboot. Nobody expected it to make $150 million. Mm-hmm. Producers and everyone in the horror film industry kind of sat and waited. The very next year, Dawn of the Dead comes out. Another smash box office hit. Mm-hmm. So now we were entering our 20th year of remakes, reboots, now reimaginings. Mm-hmm. Some are good, the vast majority are not. So about 7 years ago, when I started wanting to get into the industry and really work, and I could financially afford to take a risk, I wanted to hit new ideas, new works, new monsters, kind of the same tropes, but try something. So my first book, Claws, was a creature feature. Second book was contest art, like Battle Royale. And of course, I come into vampires. I want to do my vampire book. So 70 is a vampire novel. And over 100 years, it's all been done before. So we see like Count Dracula, we see a lot of vampires, and they're a little bit older, and they're very distinguished gentlemen. So 70 is, how did someone a little bit older, a citizen, become there? Mm-hmm. And then my new take on it is, as a culture in the last 100 years, we've accelerated. So we see our senior citizens, and I think as North Americans, as opposed to Asian, African, European cultures, we kind of disrespect our senior citizens.
Yeah.
And when we look back, 100 years ago was 1922. As a species, we have accelerated so much. So I took my protagonist and antagonist, Robert is my lead character. We like to write them both in the horror genre. And I've taken him looking into the world from a senior citizen's point of view, and kind of disappointed that he lived this good life and, old world and old fashioned. And then he gets the immortal gift. And you start to see him, what if I played it a little bad? So I'm not going to give everything away. But that's the basic concept that I thought would be new and fun. And it's 3 weeks in, it's played well. And more than anything, people have really liked the originality, which is hard when you're talking vampires, werewolves. It's been done before. It's very hard to come up with something.
Yeah, absolutely. So where did this idea and inspiration come from in the plot of 70?
Well, I tell you, I've been in property management, the 9-to-5 job, for almost 2 decades. And one thing I saw, Scotty, going back to that, and for me, I'm 44 now, not a spring chicken, but I spent a year in senior housing. And like the lead character, I'd seen a lot of males that had lost their wives. And most literature film, it's always the widow. It's always the widow. We kind of don't look at the men who try to be tough, and losing somebody. They kind of put it, and I kind of seem like these men basically die because their life partner was gone. Like I said, it's a different age. Back then you were with the same person almost from teenager to death. And they put on a brave face. And so that's where the idea had come from years and years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of sprung into, well, I could fit this into a vampire, where now age is, that's my tagline. Age is just a number. So now they have a second crack, and they can go ahead and try something maybe new, walk on the wild side, because they're not worried about their mortality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Good point. So, who made the book cover then for the book? Did you make it? Did you have somebody draw it?
Very, very good. And touching on, for new authors out there, this is my 4th year as a professional author. They actually pay me to do this, which is crazy. So my first 2 books, and I was in a couple anthologies, come from a smaller press. It's very nice. So I moved on to a place, and I highly recommend it, New Book Authors, which is a hybrid. You do pay a small fee. Your money is guaranteed. What I like about hybrids, when some people say self-published, or they've spent like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, don't ever do that, by the way. Mm-hmm. And you have to be accepted. So that was that. Now, the funny thing is, to get to your question, so New Book Authors, they asked me what kind of cover I wanted. And I got so excited because I'm a writer. I can't even draw stick figure. Like I said, I'm in my mid-40s. They call it technophobic now, is the key word for it. I could barely get into this Zoom meeting without having a nervous breakdown. And but I wanted a silver book, because a lot of books are black, and I did a black book and a white cover, and I said, okay, well, I want to do silver because it's kind of silver plays a role in it, and stakes. And I spent 4 weeks trying, and I was working with a friend of mine trying to put together a cool cover, and I thought it was cool. And then I go to the publisher, and they said, oh, that looks nice, but we're going to go like this. And so when you start dealing with higher publishers, you have to realize, because first I was very upset. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. They designed it. They have stock. And, it's really well. People like it. They are the experts. They do this research all the time. They have 20 to 30 releases a month. So I do want to speak to that also for new authors and people moving up the ladder, that you do have to do compromises. And of course, you spend the time and you think it's the coolest thing ever. But, in the end, you have to you have to compromise, and you have to listen to the people that do this. And you have to do your research who you work with. People can put together a fancy website. Talk to authors that have worked there. Reach out. It's a world where we're all connected, and they have been absolutely a fantastic. Erica Hughes, who's my publicist and editor, absolutely fantastic. But yes, they used it from a stock, and they made some additions to it. And it's played pretty well.
Awesome. So what was the most, I guess what was the hardest part in finishing this book?
The hardest part for me, coming into professional writing later, I always had these ideas for 20 years, and I just couldn't find the time because I needed to pay bills. It's hard to make a buck. So the writing has been, I have the opposite of writer's block, maybe too many ideas. And as a horror fanatic and doing review work, I watch, this is going to scare people, I watch at least 3 to 8 horror films a week, and TV shows, and I read at least 1 novel every 10 to 15 days if I can. So these ideas of my own have always been there. The hardest part for me, even starting with my first novella, has been the post-production. I never expected it to be that hard. I am not a PhD in literary, but I can write a little bit. We have all this technology. So I didn't think it was that bad. The way, and I give them credit, editors and publishers, the way that they pick and format and structure a lot of stuff. I always say I'll take 50% of credit. They really make it. And then it's a little frustrating. And as you know, Scotty, I know you have a release next fall. There's a time frame that I was never expecting. You write it, and then you want to get it out, and you want to share it with the world. Well, there's 6 to 12 months for it to hit shelves and get listed. That was the hardest, because I'm a very excitable guy. So I want it out today, and that's the hardest part, the waiting game. And sometimes it's just the way they work. Publishers like snails, but they're efficient, is what I've learned, and that's the reason why. I watch people pump out 2, 3 books, and it's just sloppy. You can't put out the sloppy work. When you're first starting, that's fine. You want to get through the process, but you have to be patient, and that's something that's been very hard.
Yeah, absolutely. My book's coming out in August, and as you said, the waiting game is so hard. My book is available for pre-order, but it's like I can't wait for it to come out already. and
Absolutely.
And a bad thing I wouldn't say bad thing, but like a thing that you want to try to avoid, like in your case, you have so many different ideas. You don't want to oversaturate your book with so many different plot points and so many different ideas, because then it becomes too much for the reader.
I agree 100%. My first book, Claws, which was basically a homage to Creature from the Black Lagoon. And I had thought of this in 1999. Of course, being in Maryland, I knew you're now one of us. But coming from, crabs are such a big part of Baltimore life, and I couldn't believe that nobody had ever done Crab Monster. And my original manuscript was 62,000 words. Well, they cut it to 32, and they were like, "You are writing a basic novella for a basic horror audience to get started. Stop trying to write needful things." So you are 1,000-point. Just because I like it and I want to read the details. I would say one of the best writers of our time right now is Stephen Graham Jones. I think he gets wordy, and I love his work, and he's unbelievable. My Heart is a Chainsaw was brilliant. I think it was nominated and probably won several books a year for the horror genre. But you read sometimes, and it's 3 to 4. Now, he's Stephen Graham Jones. But it's 3 to 4 pages of a description of a desk, and it's like, I see exactly what you're talking about. So the mainstream, and that's the biggest thing for horror authors. Your horror crowd's going to be there, and they're going to like it. Okay, jumping into that mainstream, that's where the big bucks come in. That's where your big contracts come in. It's very, very difficult.
Absolutely. So speaking about being an author, what do you believe the most challenging part of just being an author is?
I'd say, especially, there's no such thing as a part-time author or a part-time writer. And I've coined a phrase, it's like having a cool mistress. You go to bed with her at night, you wake up with her in the morning, and she nags the hell out of you all day long. So there's no, just because I work a full-time job, and I think it's 80% of authors have to supplement their income. The hardest part is, I think, concentrating in your everyday life, especially when you're really tuned in. Not that I'm going around thinking about decapitating people in my office sometimes. But that is the hardest part, to concentrate on your work. And I always say, I do a couple lessons at my local library down in Dundalk. And I always say, you have to give yourself a time frame, but you have to visit your work. Even if it's, they do the typical 1,000 words a day. Well, that's great. And I like that. I like that quota. Sometimes I go off to 2,500 to 3,000 and I get really sloppy. But even if you just read a sentence or you reread at least 15, 20 minutes, visit your work every day is the best advice I can get. So you don't get too tuned out. But yes, to answer your question, the hardest part is staying tuned in when, this is not your 24-hour job.
Right. Absolutely. Oh, pardon me. I've been up since 4:30.
Oh, boy.
Work is crazy. And speaking of work, I have a full-time job, I mean, most authors that aren't a Stephen King, for example, where their income comes from their books and they make millions of dollars, they aren't part-time writers, but they do put a lot of work in, but it's hard to micromanage it. And you got to figure a good stance for you, whether you're, if you put your hours into your full-time job and then you put in whatever for your book, whether it's, you work 5 days a week and you write maybe an hour or two after work or whatever, and then you spend 8 to 9 hours a day on Saturdays and Sundays doing the job. Like, you have to find time to get it done, or your book is not going to get done.
You can't be any more right. And I've made friends with so many talented people with amazing ideas.
Yeah.
For me, there's no wife and kids, so it's a little bit easier. I mean, but with work, and I do athletics and stuff, but also, and this is a big recommendation, like you do so well with your interviews, Scotty, and your book. I work for Horror Nation. It's not right, but if you're serious, like you got to kind of work in. You're not that VP for Lion Gate. I'm not for a head editor, but I'm working at Horror Nation. You're doing it, and most of us, so it's not even working your full-time job. It's not writing. It's you're playing an audience by being in the industry. And for us, we love it, but of course, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And you have to do it. You hit the nail on it. I've met so many talented people that have either never finished a manuscript or
oh, think I lost you. You there?
Yeah, I'm here. Did I buzz out?
Yeah, you buzzed out for about 5 seconds.
Oh, okay. So going back to that, and I have a good hint for anybody, for people that got one work and they just forget it, and they're so talented. I want to read more of their stuff. Process. And if you talk about, I can't say names off the top of my head, the Da Vinci Code, I took his master. the process before, and like you're a filmmaker as well, you have to have a battle plan before you even write it.
Yeah.
And for me, I love this. I do a lot of my process. You have to find your own process. Yeah. I love, and I have theater-based, I love the KISS analogy. Keep it simple. So I'm a 3-act guy. And I do my 3 acts. I write my characters, and then say, like, I'm getting ready to do my outline for my next work. I break it down by chapter, and then it's less intimidating. My author wants 80,000 words, so I'm confident now. 4 years ago, I would have had a car narrative, but now I'm confident because I know how to write. If it's 30 chapters, I know how to write 30 short stories instead of 80,000 words. Now, of course, we're going to do 56 revisions, but I think a process is the most important to try to get, like you say, get through it. Get it actually done when you have all other things going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm smiling right now because your process is very similar to mine. I don't use the KISS analogy in terms of saying kiss, but I do use keep it simple, stupid. I always use that phrase because the more you overcomplicate it, the more it's gonna be oversaturated, overkill. It's not gonna make sense. So keep it simple, stupid. I always use that phrase all the time. I never heard of it as KISS, but I do like that. And I always agree. You list the characters. You don't want to have 200 characters in your book. That's overkill. Keep it simple, stupid, as you mentioned. 5, 10 characters, max, maybe 5 of them being the main characters, the other 5 being supporting players, and then maybe some extra roles and all that stuff in it. Like, you don't want to oversaturate your book with characters. I always do that. I always put my characters, I put who they are, like a description of who they are, what they're involved in, and then I kind of like write down their traits. Then I figure like, well, chapter one, like if I'm going to introduce this character, I'm going to say who they are, how they are, what their height, their weight, whatever is meant to explain who they are. And like that, you don't want to overly like describe the character neither, but you want to describe it enough that when the reader is reading it, that they can get it in their mind, they can visualize it. And that's what Stephen King does brilliantly.
Yeah, I think I'm glad to hear you say that. A lot of the younger generation, they have there's a perfect point, and because King's iconic to me, and yes, some of us that grew up with that, and then that people rediscover that, read his stuff with what I call rose-colored glasses. Well, Stephen King did 2 things that I think are essential. He transformed setting and he evoked emotion. Yeah. What I mean by that, he makes you care about his characters before he kills them. Mm-hmm. And he takes you from your reading chair, your bed, and he takes you into Castle Rock. He takes you into Derry. And I don't think anybody, like I said, Needful Things is the greatest novel for me ever written. And when I talk to like literary snobs, they're like, oh, horror, you're the black sheep. I'm like, have you ever read any of his work, And then I think for the younger generations kind of coming into the newer stuff, Stephen King had 2 things. He had a tragic car accident, and then he kind of sobered up. He had talked about his addiction to alcohol and drug abuse. Yep. And I think also, where's the point where this man kind of runs out of ideas? So his work post 2000 has been more like human-based monsters. And I think the younger generation doesn't like that. I mean, whatever he writes is like, he could write a new phone book. But you're absolutely right, especially his work from like late 70s to mid 90s. For me, it's, and we all love Lovecraft, but I don't think anybody's come close. Clive Barker, and Barker does a lot of different stuff, was fantastic. But I mean, the body of work this man put out in 15 years. Yeah. One stellar. I mean, that's why we're still adapting his books. It has that evoke of emotion, and like you said, he's transformed your setting, and it's very hard to replicate. It's very hard.
Yeah. You have it. You have The Shining. You have The Green Mile, which isn't really horror based. You have that book that's a classic. I mean, he has so many books. Pet Sematary, like a lot of classics that he has that is amazing. And I mean, I can only dream to write something so brilliant. The only problem I always had with Stephen King, and I noticed it a lot in the movies more than the book per se, but is that, and I said this in a previous interview I had, is I always thought his endings sucked.
He did. I mean, he's self-defecated himself, to use that word, in the It movie when he says that. Yep. And a lot of his endings, and I think the one thing with my ending, everybody's gonna have their own process. I leave a lot of open, not to give things. I leave a lot of open endings because of course I dream of a miracle every night that somebody's gonna want a sequel and I get a nice contract. But his endings, I mean, especially in It, that's this brilliant novel. And the other thing to touch on, I mean, good luck getting published anywhere over 90,000 words, unless you build up to that. The Stand, Needful Thing. I mean, these epic books.
Mhm.
And the regular layperson reads I mean, you would look and say, okay, well, literature or a horror fanatic's going to read it. The everyday housewife, the students, everybody was reading his books back then. And I mean, these were monster books.
Yeah.
Everybody knows Game of Thrones because of the TV show. How about the people that used to read it? It was a very small percentage of people that actually read those books. They were monster books. And he made it flow and made it so interesting. But absolutely. His endings, you can go back and then I always say, especially creative people like us, we already know what we want to do. And do film reviews, which is fantastic. And one thing I've learned from people I was trained was never judge a film on the film that you wanted. That's not the film that you watch a film like that's not what I wanted. So judge a film on a film, not with the film that you wanted to see, especially when you're doing like review work as well. Yeah. So King, but I mean, there's definitely a big argument there. I mean, at the end, it's a flying space turtle. You're like, dude, I just spent 6 weeks reading this. I wanted a little something better than that, but
I always the way I do my writing process, I always believe in always have an opening and always have an ending planned out. Like, even if you have to think for hours or days or weeks or whatever, till you come up with, this is how I want to start the book. This is how I want to end the book. And this is after you have the characters and everything, but you kind of want to figure out how do you start it? How do you end it? And then the middle will just come along as you're writing, and you kind of process it as you're going along. But I always believe you should have an ending and a beginning always planned out, even if you kind of change your mind as you're writing, but you should always have know where you're going to start and how you're going to end.
Okay. Modern audience, you have got to have a strong opening. So you're absolutely right. It's got opening and ending, fill in, and you can make adjustments. But I was saying with Amazon, the author sales, there's a look inside, and 18% is what they're saying percentage of. They'll read 3 or 4 pages. Much like a horror film, you have got to capture. I hate to do the trope with an early death. Your wording in your each chapter, your first 5 to 7 pages, has really got to hook an audience these days.
Absolutely. So for anyone that would like to purchase a copy of your book, where can they get it?
It's available everywhere. So,
nice.
Through New Book Authors. The best and the cheapest way. It is available wherever books are sold online. I'm making my last step to get online on the shelves. But you can, of course, Amazon. You can put my name or 70. That's Reedinger. Barnes and Noble online, and actually Walmart. So if you got a Walmart card, you have a members club. You can go to those 3 sites. I'm big. Second and Charles is the only local bookstore I'm in now, which is in the Hagerstown area.
Nice.
And of course, we're still looking to get on some shelves. But I got older, but a lot of the sales are online.
Awesome.
If you're on any bookstore that you may be a member or something, get some discounts. It is available everywhere.
That's perfect. So the last question I do got for you, do you have anything else you'd like to promote to the listening and viewing audience? Social media accounts, websites, any other books, anything at all?
Sure. So anybody can find me on all the social media sites. Just my name, Lance Reedinger. The big thing I'd like to promote is my 3rd year with HorrorNation.com. We have 200,000 followers. At least every 3 days we have new reviews, new articles. Hopefully we're going to get Scotty something with us. Christmas with 7. I got 70. He's got 72 coming out. And we get about 20 million hits a day. So anyone who's a horror fanatic, we're now 14 worldwide on social media hits. So from when we started from nothing 3 years ago, they've been a blessing. That, like I said, Scotty, we've got to do your interviews. You got to work for websites. You want to build an audience. It's not just going to be a write a book and everybody's going to find it. So HorrorNation.com. Everybody could go there if you love horror. We got interviews. I do some of the same interviews that Scotty does, the written word, movie reviews. And also there's so much material. We really put out at least once a month what's being released in literature, television shows, and films. And it's been a lot of fun working for them.
Awesome. That's amazing. Well, definitely check that out, everybody that's watching this, and check out 70. Pick up your copy wherever books are sold. I thank you so much, Lance, for joining me today.
Thank you much, Scotty. And I look forward to seeing you at Hunt Valley this fall.
Absolutely. See you then. All right.
All right.
Bye.